Hey there. Tonight, I want to begin in a place so empty that even darkness had not yet learned how to be dark. Before Egypt had kings, before the Nile had temples leaning over its banks, before the sun knew where to rise, there was only water without shore and silence without measure. And somewhere inside that endless stillness, hidden so completely that no eye could have found him, a god was already gathering himself. Not with thunder, not with a dramatic entrance, more like a breath felt before a curtain stirs, or the cool change in a room when someone has opened a door you did not hear. That is where Amun begins. And the strange promise of his story is this: the most powerful god in Egypt may have become powerful precisely because he was hardest to see. Because he moved before anyone noticed movement. Because he shaped creation without asking for applause. Because the oldest priests eventually looked into the deep and decided the force most worth fearing and trusting was the one that stayed hidden. So tonight, we are going to drift back to the first waters, to the cosmic egg, to the city of Thebes before it grew proud, and to a god whose silence could become a kingdom. If that sounds like your kind of night, leave a like, subscribe, and settle in with me. Now let the room soften a little. Let your shoulders loosen. Unclench your jaw. Feel the weight beneath you. Chair, bed, blanket, whatever has agreed to hold you for a while. Take one slow breath in and let it go without effort. There is nothing to fix right now. Only ancient water, a little candle light, and a hidden god waiting very patiently in the dark. I have always found it strange that the oldest creation stories are often less interested in beginnings than in conditions. They do not rush to tell you who won first, or who shouted loudest, or who claimed the largest piece of sky. They ask a quieter question. What did existence feel like before anything solid had the courage to appear? The Egyptian answer, at least in one of its oldest and most haunting forms, begins with none, the primordial waters. Not a sea exactly, because a sea has edges. None had no edges. It was depth without boundary, movement without direction, possibility without shape. If you were standing there with me, and thankfully you are not, because primordial waters sound terrible for the lungs, you would see nothing fixed. No horizon, no stars, no sunlight, no moon, no reeds at the riverbank, no sandstone warming under dawn. Just a vast, dark fluid stillness, the kind of stillness that feels older than time because time has not started measuring itself yet. Within that immeasurable expanse, the Egyptians imagined the first divine principles gathering into form. In Hermopolis they spoke of the Ogdoad, 8 primordial beings arranged in 4 pairs, each pair holding one aspect of the unfinished cosmos. Nun and Nonet carried the endless waters. He and Hauhet embodied infinity, the stretching without limit. Kek and Kauket held darkness. Not evil darkness, just the absence of revealed things. And then there was Amun with Amunet, the hidden pair, the unseen force of air and wind, the invisible pressure that moves through everything while remaining difficult to catch in the hand or pin down in speech. That hidden quality matters more than it first seems to matter. In ancient Egyptian thought, names had power. To name a thing clearly was to know something of it, and to know it was, in a certain careful way, to have some hold over it. Amun existed in the opposite condition. He was the hidden one, the force that could be felt without being fully grasped, present without offering himself up to easy definition. Theologically, that is brilliant. A God who cannot be fully seen, cannot be fully limited. A God who cannot be neatly described, can expand into any silence left open for him. And so his earliest presence is not the kind that tears the heavens open. No bright violence, no cosmic trumpet. He emerges the way breath emerges on a winter morning, visible only after it has already left the body. The old traditions describe a gentle movement across the face of the waters, subtle ripples traveling outward through what had seemed entirely still. Not a storm, just the first persuasion of air. Amun announcing himself by what shifts around him rather than by direct display. There is something very elegant in that, and maybe a little unnerving too. Most gods in myth arrive as if they have hired excellent musicians. Amun arrives like a thought you are not sure was your own. The Egyptians paired him with Amunet, and together they represented the hidden aspects of air and wind. Yet even in this pairing there was a useful softness rather than exact duplication. One could imagine her as the sustaining breath, the gentle holding of life, while he carried the animating impulse, the quiet spark that makes stillness begin to think about becoming motion. They are not loud deities. They are foundational deities. And foundation is often easy to overlook because everything above it keeps distracting the eye. That may be the most important thing to understand at the beginning of his story. Amun starts in obscurity, but not in significance. He is hidden because hidden forces are often the ones doing the deepest work. The Egyptians knew this from ordinary life, as well as theology. You do not see air, but lose it for a moment, and the body becomes very clear about its value. You do not always notice the wind, but let the Nile marshes go perfectly still, and you feel that something is missing. The visible, spectacular things attract devotion quickly. The invisible, necessary things endure. So let us slow the scene down further. Imagine the surface of none before that first stirring. Black, but not merely black. More like dark blue folded into dark green and then dissolved into an absence of color altogether. A surface without shore, without reflection, because nothing distinct exists, yet to be reflected. Then a movement, very slight. A line across the water so delicate it almost vanishes before you fully see it. Then another. Then a widening ring, as if the unseen had just leaned closer to the visible world, and the visible world had answered with a tremor. That is Amun's first signature. Not appearance, but effect. Some of the old traditions say he had a role in the cosmic egg as well, though the details shift from one theological center to another. It is debated. In some versions, the egg is more closely linked with other creator gods, especially Ptah or Thoth, both of whom had very established theological machinery behind them and perhaps better publicists. Gods with scribes always do well in posterity. Still, certain texts and interpretations allow space for Amun's hidden involvement. Perhaps his breath maintained the egg from within, holding the fragile pressure that made emergence possible. Perhaps he moved outside it, shaping development by invisible guidance? We cannot be sure. What matters for the narrative spine is that even where he is not given the brightest credit, his pattern is already clear. He supports creation through concealment. Honestly, I rather like that about him. There is something almost dryly funny in the idea that one of the greatest gods in Egypt spent his early epics doing essential cosmic work and then watching other deities receive the dramatic introductions. It is the divine version of doing the group project properly, while someone else gives the presentation. But hidden influence has a strange advantage. Because no one fully sees its borders, it can spread without attracting immediate resistance. While more visible gods become fixed to certain symbols, certain cities, certain obvious functions, Amun remains adaptable. Air moves everywhere. Breath enters every living thing. Concealment slips through cracks more easily than sunlight. The texts suggest that as creation took on more structure, Amun's influence extended with it. Quietly, patiently. By the time others might have noticed the breadth of his presence, that breadth was already there. This is one reason his hiddenness was not treated as a flaw. It was immunity. He could shape without being blamed, guide without being confronted, work through suggestion rather than collision. The early creation accounts sometimes imply that he planted ideas in other divine minds, letting them believe those ideas had arisen naturally. Again, there is something unsettlingly sophisticated in that. He is not merely strong. He is elusive in a strategic way, and all of this unfolds while Egyptian religious thought itself is still fluid, still regional, still happily capable of holding overlapping truths together. That is another thing I have always admired about ancient Egypt. It did not panic every time two stories both seemed meaningful. The priests of one city might emphasize one creator, the priests of another city another, and instead of forcing everything into a single sterile line, they often allowed the divine world to remain layered. Amun grows within that layered atmosphere. Not yet supreme, not yet king of the gods, more like a pressure gathering beneath the visible surface of theology. When artists tried to depict him in the oldest periods, the results were often restrained, sparse imagery, a figure that could blur at the edges. Blue skin, suggestive of sky depth and invisible air. Simpler iconography than one might expect from a later supreme deity. This too feels right. If your essence is concealment, lavish visual certainty would almost be bad branding. And perhaps that is why his eventual rise feels so compelling. He begins from what seems least theatrical, the hidden breath, the unnamed pressure, the ripple before the first clear event. Yet these are the conditions that make life itself possible. The sun may be glorious, yes, but let there be no air for 1 minute, and its glory becomes difficult to appreciate. The Nile may flood magnificently, but without the breath in a farmer's chest, magnificence remains inconveniently theoretical. The Egyptian mind understood this practical side of mystery. Amun was not hidden because he was absent. He was hidden because the deepest sustaining realities often are. As the primordial era draws toward order, the waters of none are no longer only stillness. They have become a place of gestation. The Ogdoad have done their quiet work. Distinctions begin to matter. Space and potential lean toward form. Darkness begins to imply the possibility of light. Infinity begins to sound less like emptiness and more like room. And moving through all of it, impossible to isolate, yet impossible to exclude, is Amun, the hidden breath, the god who was there before anyone properly realized he had arrived. Stay with that image a little longer. The water breathing without lungs. The darkness waiting without fear. The first hidden god moving through the unfinished world like a hand beneath heavy cloth, altering the shape without showing the fingers. It is a calm beginning, but not a harmless one. Because once a force learns how much can be done from concealment, it rarely forgets. Amun's earliest gift is life. Yes, but also strategy. He learns from the first moment that what remains invisible can become indispensable. And in a divine world where visibility often draws rivalry, that is a very useful lesson to learn before everyone else has properly opened their eyes. In the next stretch of the story, that hidden presence will brush against the mystery of the cosmic egg and the fur-living order, where Amun's role remains half-veiled, half-whispered, and perhaps all the more powerful for that. By the time the First Order begins to gather out of none, Amun has already established his favorite method. He works without demanding to be seen. That method follows him into the next great mystery, the cosmic egg, the fragile chamber of becoming that appears in several Egyptian creation traditions. The details differ from city to city, priesthood to priesthood, and century to century. Some scholars would point more firmly toward Thoth in Hermopolis, others toward Ptah in Memphis, and they are right to do so, because Egyptian theology rarely liked being tidy for the convenience of later readers. Still, within the story we are following, Amun's presence lingers close to the egg, not always credited, not always described in the boldest ink, but there, like pressure inside a shell before hatching. I think that is the right atmosphere for him. Not absent, not center stage, necessary and half-concealed. Imagine the cosmic egg suspended above or within the primordial waters, depending on which tradition your tired, friendly priest happens to favor tonight. It is not a bird's egg as we know it from river reeds and nests and ordinary hunger. It is the first enclosed possibility, a boundary around unspoken life, smooth, sealed, waiting. The outer surface, holding in silence so complete that even the gods around it may not fully understand what is preparing itself inside. And around that smooth, still form there is Amun, or within it there is Amun, or moving through it in a way the later stories refuse to make entirely simple. That refusal is part of the beauty. A hidden god remains hidden even when taking part in creation. If you were standing beside me at the edge of those first waters, and again I must stress that suitable footwear for primordial reality is notoriously difficult to obtain, you might notice the egg, not first by sight, but by atmosphere. A subtle tension in the air, a held breath, the sensation that something has gathered itself and is resisting the urge to break open too soon. That restraint matters. Creation in this mode is not chaos flinging sparks. It is incubation. Amun's contribution, where the tradition lets us feel it, is breath, pressure, interior life. The invisible condition that keeps a form from being merely beautiful and empty. The egg can exist as structure under the care of other powers. Amun makes it feel ready to live. His hidden wind moves either through the shell or around it, preserving its integrity, guiding its maturation, giving it that faint inner insistence that all living things seem to possess just before emergence. I have always found that image deeply calming, also a little eerie, which is perhaps ideal for a sleep story. A whole cosmos held together by a god who specializes in not quite showing his face. The older myths say, or at least imply in certain theological streams, that Amun whispered the first words so softly that only the egg itself heard them. That is such a lovely and unsettling idea. Not a proclamation to the gathered heavens, not a speech for applause, just a hidden murmur into a sealed beginning, the kind of divine speech that does not seek witnesses because it does not require validation. It only needs the right listener. And then there is the old problem of recognition. Other creator gods in Egypt are easier to celebrate publicly. Ptah speaks and crafts. Thoth measures and names. Ra shines. These are excellent qualities for attracting visible devotion. They leave memorable images. Amun, on the other hand, moves through influence, suggestion, sustaining breath, and concealed design. If he contributes to creation, he does so in a way that can be missed by anyone looking only for spectacle. That is not just a theological quirk. It becomes part of his future character. He is the god whose importance increases the longer one thinks. This helps explain why his rise later in Egyptian history feels both surprising and inevitable. Surprising because he begins in the half-light, without the obvious dramatic claims of solar kingship. Inevitable because the hidden and sustaining aspects of reality do not stop mattering simply because they are not flashy. If anything, they matter more. A kingdom can survive one cloudy day. Try living without breath. The priests understood that. Perhaps not all at once, and never in exactly the same language everywhere, but they understood it well enough to keep returning to Amun, to hiddenness, to the power of what moves through things without offering itself up for easy control. As the egg prepares to open, the atmosphere of the cosmos changes. The stillness of none is no longer pure suspension. It has become expectancy. The waters seem to listen. The darkness seems to thin, not because light has fully arrived, but because possibility has begun choosing directions. The Ogdoad, those ancient paired forces, hover in the background of this moment, like principles waiting to become a world. The endless water, the deep darkness, the limitless stretch, the hidden air. Everything necessary is present. The question is, which element will first make the silence irreversible? Some traditions give that honor to light. Fair enough. Light is very noticeable and has excellent instinct for dramatic timing. But before light can matter to living beings, something has to be able to receive it. Something has to breathe beneath it. Something has to endure after the first brilliance passes. That is where Amun's contribution feels so essential. He is not merely first movement. He is first sustainment. The egg cracks. Let us take that slowly. Not an explosion. Not a violent split. More like the smallest sharp line running across a smooth surface, so fine that one might miss it if one blinked. Then another. A web of pressure finding release, sound, dry and delicate, the sound of enclosure yielding. From within comes not only radiance but animation, the sense that what emerges will not simply shine, but continue. The breath hidden in the shell has done its work. Whether or not every priest in ancient Egypt would have given Amun that exact credit is another matter. It is debated, and we should be gentle about that. Egyptian religion was a great house with many rooms, and each room insisted it had the best angle on eternity. But the narrative logic remains faithful. Amun's early role is one of subtle indispensability. He makes life possible without necessarily demanding formal ownership of the moment. That can be frustrating, of course. For us as readers, for later priests, maybe for Amun himself, if one allows the god a little inward ambition, because hidden contribution creates dependence, but not always gratitude. Amun can help sustain the cosmos and still watch more visible deities receive the songs. That tension between essential influence and public recognition is part of the dark sweetness of his story. A hidden god can be overlooked only so long before hiddenness begins to sharpen into strategy. You know that feeling when someone at a table says very little, and everyone assumes they are the least important person there, only to discover later that they were quietly steering the entire discussion. That is Amun in the early cosmos, the divine equivalent of the person not waving their hands around, which in mythology usually means they are about to become very significant. As ordered creation emerges, the relationship between gods and worshippers also begins shifting. Deities like Ra could be confirmed by daily experience. There is the sun. There it goes. Very persuasive. Hapi could be trusted when the Nile flooded. Also convenient. But Amun required a different sort of attention. You could not just point upward and say, "There he is." His signs were indirect. Breath in the lungs. Air over water. The unseen influence behind events whose surfaces belonged to other powers. That meant devotion to him would always contain an element of faith. Or perhaps better, trust in the hidden. This gave his cult a special quality even in these earliest theological roots. To worship Amun was to admit that the deepest truths may not be the easiest to display. It required patience, interpretation, a taste for mystery. It also allowed priests remarkable flexibility, because a hidden god can be understood as present in more places than a strongly bounded one. Once a deity is tied too tightly to one obvious phenomenon, expansion becomes harder. Amun is tied to hiddenness itself. That is an empire waiting to happen. But we are not at empire yet. For now we are still in the dawn before dawn. In that luminous not yet, when the first ordered reality is stretching its limbs. The waters of none no longer feel endless in quite the same way. Not because they have become smaller, but because a center has begun to form within them. A place of emergence, a principle around which later worlds may gather their stories. Breath moves. Light prepares. The shell opens. The first life-bearing order enters the cosmos, with Amun's invisible companionship still around it, like cool air after rain. And because he remains hidden, he can move on. That is the next subtle change. Once creation is underway, Amun is no longer limited to helping it begin. He can slip into its structures, align himself with its rhythms, and extend his influence without drawing territorial outrage too early from other gods. The Hidden One has learned the oldest political art in the universe. Become necessary before anyone realizes you are expanding. We will soon follow him south to Thebes, where this old concealed force meets a goddess very unlike himself in appearance but not in power, and where hidden breath will find visible majesty in the form of Mut. But before we leave the cosmic beginning, let the egg remain in your mind for just a little longer. A closed world, a whisper inside it, a pressure that does not break the shell too soon. A God whose greatest gift is making life possible without standing in the center of the painting. That is how Amun enters the ordered universe. Not by claiming every line of the story, but by becoming the reason the story can keep breathing long after the first line is spoken. And once a god has learned how much can be accomplished from behind the visible world, he is unlikely to remain content with obscurity forever. There is one more quiet thing to notice here. The Egyptian cosmos does not rush from birth into confidence. Everything remains a little damp with uncertainty. Newly made order still remembers the pressure of chaos around it. The first light is beautiful. Yes, but beauty this early feels fragile, like a lamp carried across a windy courtyard. Amun suits that tenderness. He is a god for thresholds, for the uncertain interval between not yet and almost. When the universe is still deciding how solid to become, a hidden breath is better company than a trumpet. So the first living order opens its eyes. If a cosmos can be said to have eyes, and there beside it is the God who helped it breathe. Not celebrated loudly, not enthroned yet, just present, patient, and already slipping into the spaces between visible things where future power likes to wait. In the next movement, that patience will lead him out of primordial obscurity and into the human geography of Egypt itself, where temples, priesthoods, and royal ambition will finally give the hidden god a stage, whether the rest of the pantheon feels ready for him or not. By the time Amun's hidden influence begins to settle into the human geography of Egypt, the world feels very different from the black stillness of none. There are riverbanks now, reed beds, temple walls warming under sun, dust rising from sandals, voices passing through courtyards, and above all, there is Thebes, not yet the glittering center it will become, but already gathering importance the way a storm gathers far beyond the horizon, felt before fully seen. This is where Amun meets Mut. I have always thought their union makes a particular kind of sense, the kind ancient priests would have appreciated because it resolves more than one problem at once. Amun is hidden power, mysterious, subtle, difficult to depict cleanly, impossible to pin down for long. Mut is something else entirely. She is visible authority, fierce motherhood, royal protection with sharp edges. If Amun is wind moving behind a curtain, Mut is the broad shadow of protective wings cast across a throne. Her name means mother, but there is nothing soft or diminished about that title in Egyptian imagination. Mut is not motherhood reduced to sweetness. She is motherhood as guardianship, as sovereign care, as the force that shelters and warns in the same breath. The vulture became one of her strongest symbols, and that bird carried a dignity ancient Egyptians understood well. A vulture circles high, sees far, waits with impossible patience. And when something under its protection is threatened, the sky itself seems to take notice. That quality fit Mut perfectly. She is regal, watchful, and never merely decorative. By the time Amun's presence grows strong in Thebes, Mut already belongs deeply to that landscape. Her authority is local, royal, political, and sacred all at once. She stands close to the palace, close to the temple, close to the emotional heart of a city trying to understand itself as more than a provincial power. And because Thebes is rising, the priesthood faces a delicate challenge. How do you integrate a god of hidden cosmic significance with a goddess who already embodies visible local legitimacy? How do you avoid rivalry when both are too important to reduce? The solution they craft is elegant. Amun and Mut do not compete. They complete. This is one of the most sophisticated things Egyptian theology does again and again. When two divine powers are too meaningful to discard, priests do not always flatten one beneath the other. Sometimes they draw a deeper line and say these forces were meant to meet. The hidden requires form. The visible requires mystery behind it. Concealed wisdom is difficult for ordinary worshippers to love, unless it can take on a face. Protective queenship becomes even stronger when joined to a force older than sunlight and subtler than law. So the stories begin to speak of marriage. If you were standing with me in Thebes on the day this sacred union is imagined, the first thing you might notice would be sound. Not loud noise, but layered ritual sound. Sandals moving over stone, linen brushing against skin, sistrums whispering their metallic music in careful rhythms. Priests speaking in measured voices beneath painted columns. Somewhere incense rising, its sweetness mingling with the dry warmth of dust and old temple walls. The city would feel expectant, not frantic. Even divine weddings in Egypt know how to keep their composure. Amun appears in ceremony, wearing the feathered crown that will become so closely associated with him. Those high twin plumes rising above his head, like visible signs of invisible air. His skin in sacred art keeps its blue tone, not the blue of bright summer sky, but the deeper blue that suggests hidden depth, shaded spaces, and breath moving where no eye can follow. There is calm in him, and a reserve that feels more powerful than display. He does not need to dazzle at first glance. He has already learned that quiet influence lasts longer. Mut arrives as queenly force. The double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt rests upon her. And that detail matters because it links her not only to divine motherhood, but to unified kingship itself. In her iconography, there is often a sense of poised ferocity, the kind that protects not through panic, but through certainty. Her wings, whether shown literally or only implied through posture and regalia, create a sheltering image so strong it almost becomes architecture. She is less like a soft embrace and more like a sanctuary with teeth. Their union is described not as romance in the simple mortal sense, but as cosmic necessity. That is a phrase worth lingering over. Amun's hidden nature had allowed him to expand without attracting too much resistance. But hiddenness alone cannot rule a kingdom in full daylight. It needs visible expression. It needs a throne, a temple, a motherly authority that can be recognized by both priests and ordinary people. Mut, for her part, possesses all the majestic visibility a divine queen could need. Yet visibility without hidden depth can become brittle. Joined to Amun, her sovereignty receives an invisible root system extending back into creation itself. The wedding, then, becomes more than a marriage. It is a theological bridge. Picture the temple court at dusk. Gold light on carved stone. The tops of columns catching the last warmth of day. Priests lifting offerings in practiced arcs. The smell of oil, incense, warm limestone, and the faint, sweet rot of river reeds somewhere farther off in the evening air. The sacred bark waiting nearby. Torches prepared for when the sky darkens. And between all of this, a sense that the city itself is being rewritten. Not destroyed. Not overturned. Rewritten more carefully, with a stronger hand. I have always found that kind of myth almost political in the most graceful way. No god storms the gates. No older power is theatrically humiliated. Instead, influence settles, and then settles again, until one day everyone realizes the center of gravity has shifted. That is exactly what happens here. Amun and Mut together create a new model of divine authority. Hidden wisdom and visible majesty now belong to one household. The old cosmic breath that moved across none is suddenly at home in a temple city. The local protective queen is suddenly linked to primordial mystery. The result is enormous. Once this pairing is established, Thebes can imagine itself not as merely one sacred center among many, but as the place where invisible cosmic authority has chosen to dwell openly. And because gods in Egypt rarely remain private for long when kings notice them, the political dimension follows almost immediately. Theban rulers see themselves reflected in this marriage. Amun offers the hidden strategy, the unseen intelligence, the right to say that power has deeper roots than ordinary sight can measure. Mut offers visible protection, royal legitimacy, maternal ferocity guarding the state like a bird spreading wings over its young. Together, they become the sort of divine couple a rising dynasty would adore. They mirror aspiration. They sanctify centralization. They give theology to ambition. This is why their union feels so steady in the tradition. It is useful, yes, but it is also genuinely resonant. Even beyond politics, it satisfies something emotionally intuitive. Wisdom and protection belong together. Mystery and sovereignty belong together. Breath and body. Invisible force and visible care. The marriage makes the cosmos feel more balanced, not less. There is also a softer emotional reason the union endured so well in imagination. Amun, by himself, can feel distant, especially in the earliest theological layers, almost too abstract to lean toward with ordinary affection. Mut changes that. She gives the hidden one a household, a rhythm of care, a sense that the invisible force behind breath has chosen not only to influence the world, but to dwell within it. And Amun changes her too. He draws her beyond local protection into cosmic significance. She is no longer only guardian of a city or crown. She becomes partner to a mystery older than kings. That mutual enlargement is one of the quiet pleasures of this part of the story. Neither deity becomes smaller in the marriage. Each becomes more complete. If you listen closely to the temple atmosphere imagined around them, You can almost hear the theology settling into daily practice. Priests adjusting liturgy, sculptors refining iconography, court officials noticing which names now carry new weight in ceremonies. The city itself taking on the confidence of a place under very particular protection. Hidden breath above the rooftops, vulture wings over the throne. The marriage is sacred, yes, but it is also infrastructural in the deepest religious sense. It gives Egypt, and especially Thebes, a new way to imagine stability. Let us slow down again and watch evening fall over Thebes. The last sunlight thins into bronze. Temple shadows lengthen. Water in the nearby river channels grows darker and smoother, holding strips of fading color. Priests finish one sequence of rites and begin another. Somewhere, a child in the city laughs before being hushed to sleep. Somewhere, bread is broken for the evening meal. Somewhere, a scribe lowers his reed pen and rubs a cramped wrist, not realizing that the gods he records are changing the shape of his world. Inside the sacred precinct, Amun and Mut are no longer only adjacent powers. They are a household, a center, a promise that divine rule can operate through both concealment and display. This affects not only worship, but imagination itself. Once people begin to think of the gods as a family rooted in Thebes, the city becomes emotionally warmer and politically stronger. A hidden god alone can remain too abstract. A divine family can be loved, celebrated, and copied. That thought leads us naturally to the next great development. Amun and Mut do not remain only a pair. Their union seeks completion, and that completion comes through Khonsu, the moon child. But before he arrives, I want to stay a little longer with his parents, because the stillness just before a divine child appears has its own particular beauty. Mut, fierce and composed, becomes not only queen but expectant mother within the sacred imagination. Amun, still hidden even in prominence, leans further into visible history without ever losing that inward reserve. The Temple of Thebes breathes differently now, more inhabited, more certain of its place. The city itself seems to listen differently at night, as if the air above its roofs carries a newer, steadier pulse. You know that feeling when a room changes not because anyone has moved the furniture, but because a certain person has entered and sat down quietly, and suddenly everything arranges itself around them. That is what Amun and Mut together do to the pantheon in this phase. Other gods still matter. Of course, Egypt is far too theologically generous to erase everyone else simply because one household has become dazzlingly important. But the pattern has changed. A center has formed. Thebes is no longer just another city speaking to the heavens. It is becoming the place where hidden and visible power have chosen to share a throne. And because that throne now feels stable, creation itself seems to lean toward renewal. In the next part of our night, that renewal will take the form of a child born under lunar rhythm, silver and blue, healer of sickness, keeper of cycles, the one who turns family into triad and makes time itself feel as if it belongs to Thebes. When Khonsu enters the story, he does not arrive like the noon sun. That would have been too simple. And he belongs to a family that prefers more interesting forms of power. His father is the hidden breath behind visible things. His mother is the fierce queen whose protection feels like a sheltering sky. Their child comes by moonlight, which means he arrives through rhythm, return, and the kind of illumination that reveals without exposing too harshly. The old traditions place his conception under celestial tension, a moment when the hidden and the visible overlap in a more delicate balance than usual. Lunar eclipse, darkened sky, the brief swallowing of familiar light. It is exactly the sort of atmosphere that suits the sun of Amun and Mut. Not chaos, but suspended certainty, a hush over the heavens, the kind of night when priests would look upward a little longer than usual and ordinary people would finish their sentences more quietly. Mut carries him through a full lunar year in the sacred imagination. That detail feels important because it binds him to measured recurrence from the beginning. He is not merely born into time. He is born as one of time's gentler rulers. The waxing and waning moon becomes his body, written across the sky, and every household in Egypt, whether they know his theology in detail or not, can look upward and watch his character changing night by night. When he is finally born, it is under the new moon, at the darkest point of the cycle, when visibility seems smallest, but renewal is already secretly underway. I have always liked that image. A child of hidden things, born not at full brilliance, but at the quiet turning point, where loss begins becoming return. It is emotionally perfect for this family. Picture the temple precinct at that hour. Thebes at night. Air cooler now, the day's heat loosening from stone. Water somewhere in the dark, making that soft river sound which is half movement and half memory. Priests walking with lamps shielded from the wind. The scent of oil, myrrh, linen, and warm dust slowly giving itself over to night chill. Above, a sky that looks empty to the untrained eye, though the learned know emptiness is often only concealment waiting for form. Then the first cry. The stories describe it almost as a sound heard best by those who understand hidden language. That feels right for Khonsu. He is not an overwhelming deity at first. He is intimate, cyclical. He enters the world like a silver thread being drawn carefully through dark cloth. And with him comes the crescent, the first visible curve of return, slight and elegant and full of promise. His appearance carries both parents within it. Blue from Amun, but paled and softened into moon-touched silver. Protective calm from Mut, but made gentler by youth. In some descriptions, his complexion seems to shift, not fixed in one stable tone, but moving between luminous white, soft silver, and deeper blue, depending on the phase of the moon and the quality of the night. That visual instability is not a flaw. It is his essence. Khonsu is never exactly the same from one evening to the next, and that makes him a very comforting god, if you think about it. He teaches change without collapse, diminishment without loss, return without panic. His lunar disk rests upon his head, and unlike the hard, blazing circle of a solar symbol, this one feels cooler, rounder, almost contemplative. His eyes are often imagined with a gentle brightness, enough to guide, but not enough to wound. If Ra commands attention, Khonsu invites trust. If Amun rules by hidden depth and Mut by regal authority, Khonsu wins devotion by staying close to ordinary fear and easing it. That is why healing becomes one of his earliest great roles. The source tells of a young prince struck by a mysterious illness that earthly healers cannot cure. It is the sort of episode ancient theology loves because it allows a god to prove not only power, but tenderness. Khonsu descends during the full moon, when his radiance is at its fullest. There is something almost cinematic about that. Though cinema is, of course, much younger than temples and fevers. Still, the image stays with you. A child of the divine house, entering quietly in the hour when moonlight paints stone in pale milk, white, and even anxious breathing sounds louder than usual. Picture the sick chamber. A woven mat. A body burning with fever beneath linen. Bowls of water gone warm too quickly. A mother's tired hands. A physician's herbs giving off bitter smells that no longer seem hopeful. Outside, the city hushed in the late hours, and then moonlight strengthening at the doorway, not in a crude, supernatural burst, but in a patient silver bloom. The room cooling by degrees, shadows becoming gentler. Khonsu leaning over the boy with hands bright, not like flame, but like water holding light. He touches the prince's brow, and the sickness leaves as tides leave shore. Not all at once, but with the sense that what had pressed inward is now being quietly drawn away. I like that image, because it suits the moon so well. Khonsu does not hack illness apart. He pulls it back, coaxes it outward, restores balance by changing the tide. From that moment his reputation grows. Healing and travel by night become two of his tender specialties. It makes sense. The moon belongs to those who are still awake when many others have surrendered to sleep. Travelers on roads, watchers on walls, mothers with restless children, priests in late rites, the ill, the grieving, the worried, the ones counting hours instead of enjoying them. Khonsu is naturally drawn to such people because moonlight has always felt like a companion for the wakeful. One story carries him south into Nubia, where plague has spread along the river settlements. The image here is worth stretching slowly, because it shows how the Theban triad's influence reaches beyond local comfort into wider sacred geography. Khonsu is no longer just the precious child in his parents' temple. He is a moving force, a healer traveling where suffering gathers. Imagine the Nile farther south, broad and dark under a swollen moon. Villages quiet in the uneasy way. Communities become quiet when sickness has stayed too long. Water jars covered. Cooking fires smaller than usual. People speaking in hushed, practical voices, conserving strength and hope at the same time. Then, above them, an unusually bright moon remains visible longer than expected, pale even against daylight's edge. Priests later say Khonsu has come. He moves through those afflicted regions not as a conqueror, but as a patient physician of divine scale. The water sources are purified. Fever loosens. Breath deepens. Strength returns by degrees. That gradual method matters. Khonsu's miracles are not usually described as chaotic ruptures in reality. They feel rhythmic, almost tidal, in keeping with his nature. He restores cycles that have gone wrong. He realigns bodies with the quieter laws of renewal. And because people remember help more tenderly than doctrine, shrines rise for him beyond Egypt's older sacred core. This is an important expansion. The Theban family is becoming not merely powerful, but beloved in practical ways. Amun may command awe. Mut may command reverence. Khonsu gathers gratitude, which is its own kind of empire. His adventures do not remain entirely gentle, though even his darker stories retain lunar elegance. The source tells of malevolent beings trying to halt the moon's phases, trapping the cycle in darkness so that the Theban triad's order might weaken. That is the right sort of enemy for Khonsu, because his deepest gift is rhythm. To attack him is to attack recurrence itself, the comforting promise that what fades may return. So a battle unfolds across 28 days, one full lunar month. I find that structure beautiful. Each night a different aspect of the young god's power emerges. The first thin cunning of the new moon, the increasing confidence of the waxing crescent, the poised authority of half-light, the overwhelming calm of the full moon, then the wise restraint of waning, the refusal to confuse less visibility with less presence. His enemies cannot adapt, because he is never static. Every time they think they understand his strength, it has already shifted phase. There is a useful lesson in that. Fixed power can be challenged directly. Cyclical power is harder to defeat because it is built around change. Khonsu wins, not by being one thing very hard, but by being many shades of one essence at the right time. By the end of these stories, the family dynamic within the Theban triad has become unmistakably rich. Amun is the hidden father, whose wisdom often comes in private moments, the quiet transfer of strategy and insight. Mut is the visible mother, emotionally legible, fiercely protective, practical in the way those who run households and kingdoms alike must be practical. Khonsu is the child of renewal, the one who carries healing out into the world and then returns, changed but still himself. The three together form not only a theological grouping, but a model. This is why Egyptian royal households became so interested in them. The pharaoh could see in Amun the ideal of hidden strategic kingship, ruling not only by spectacle, but by intelligence and unseen discernment. The queen could see in Mut the pattern of visible protection, dynastic legitimacy, and fierce maternal authority. The heir could see in Khonsu the task of renewal, public presence, and the promise that power must continue rather than merely endure. The triad gives Egypt a divine family through which royal families can understand themselves. If you were walking through Thebes at this stage of the story, perhaps just after moonrise, perhaps hearing temple chants drift across the city in low, measured waves, you would feel that something had settled, a center of gravity. The hidden god is no longer alone. The fierce goddess is no longer merely local. Their sun has filled the night sky with a cycle ordinary people can trust. Every month, the heavens rehearse the truth of the family. Concealment, emergence, fullness, diminishment, return. There is comfort in that, and also power. Because a god of hidden beginnings, a goddess of regal protection, and a moonchild who heals and returns together make Thebes seem less like a city under patronage and more like a sacred household from which order itself may radiate. That is the next great step. Once a city believes its local divine family mirrors cosmic principles, its ambitions become difficult to keep small. Theban rulers begin to feel that. Priests certainly feel it. Temple walls begin carrying the confidence of a place that suspects history is turning in its direction. Khonsu's moonlight spreads over rooftops and columns, over sleeping courtyards and silent statues, and every silver wash across stone feels like confirmation. The family is real. Their order is elegant. Their city is rising. And still, one more transformation waits ahead. Because, however complete the triad may appear, Egypt is a land of old gods and long memories. The visible daily authority of Ra cannot simply be ignored. Solar kingship still blazes in the religious imagination. For Amun to move from powerful Theban god to unquestioned supreme divinity, his hidden breath will have to meet the sun itself. That meeting will not erase what he has become with Mut and Khonsu. It will magnify it, until the hidden one can stand in full daylight without ceasing to be mysterious. So let the moon drift a little higher now. Let Khonsu's cool light remain on the temple stone. Let the family hold its shape for a quiet moment longer. In the next part of the story, Amun will rise even further, joining with Ra in one of the most extraordinary acts of theological fusion in the ancient world, becoming the god who is both unseen wisdom and visible kingship at once. By the time Amun stands at the center of Thebes, with Mut beside him and Khonsu rising through the night sky, his story has already traveled a remarkable distance. He began as hidden breath in the dark waters before creation. He became the quiet force behind life, then the unseen wisdom behind a royal household of gods. Yet Egypt was never a land where one god could simply drift upward without meeting the great old blaze of another. Sooner or later, Amun had to face the sun. That meeting changed everything. For more than 1,000 years before Amun's ascent, Ra had already burned at the heart of Egyptian imagination. His authority was plain to see. Every morning, the eastern horizon brightened. Every day, the sun crossed the sky in a journey so reliable that it became the model for kingship itself. Ra did not need subtle arguments in his favor. He arrived in light, on schedule, with all the confidence of a deity who had excellent visibility and knew it. Amun was different, hidden, inward, present through what could not be fully grasped. If Ra represented the divine that shines openly over the world, Amun represented the divine that moves inside it, behind it, beneath it. At first, these qualities might seem opposed, but the genius of Egyptian theology is that it often looked at opposition and saw an opportunity for completion. The priests of Thebes and the kings who needed their wisdom recognized that a rising empire required more than a local family of gods. It required a supreme divine authority wide enough to hold both the hidden and the visible, both subtle strategy and public splendor. And so Amun met Ra, not in battle, but in fusion. I have always found that one of the most elegant religious solutions in the ancient world: no crude overthrow, no bitter dismissal of the older solar tradition. Instead, the Theban priests did something much more sophisticated. They said, in effect, that the sun everyone sees each day is not diminished by hiddenness. It is completed by it. The visible disk crossing the heavens is only part of the truth. Behind the light stands concealed wisdom, secret planning, breath before radiance. And so the two names begin to lean toward each other until they become one. Amun-Ra. Picture Karnak at dawn. The temple is still cool in its deeper corridors. Night has not fully let go of the stone. Priests move through shadow with measured steps, carrying oil, incense, and fresh flowers that still hold the chill of morning. Outside, the eastern edge of the sky begins to pale. Not gold yet. Only that first faint whitening that makes every carved pillar look more ancient for a few delicate moments. Then light begins touching the highest surfaces, feather by feather, lintel by lintel, and all at once the old hidden god of air and the old visible lord of the sun seem to meet in the architecture itself. Darkness recedes, but not entirely. It remains in the chambers behind, in the places where mystery keeps its seat. Light pours forward, but it does so through air, through space, through the very invisible medium Amun had always ruled. That was the theological key. Amun's breath gives passage to Ra's radiance. Ra's radiance reveals the world Amun's hidden intention has prepared. One plans in concealment. One manifests in glory. Together they form a kind of complete kingship the separate gods could only suggest in pieces. This fusion did not happen all at once. Gods with long histories are rarely willing to become simple overnight. The process took generations, shaped by priests, patrons, royal inscriptions, court ceremonies, and the practical needs of empire. Egypt, in the new kingdom, had become vast, wealthy, ambitious, and difficult to govern through old local loyalties alone. The Theban rulers needed a god who could stretch from hidden sanctuary to open sky, from southern temples to northern memory, from private divine favor to public universal rule. Amun-Ra gave them exactly that. The iconography changed with the theology. Amun kept his feathered crown, those high twin plumes still rising with elegant force. But now solar imagery gathered around him. Discs of gold, light caught in the edges of sacred forms. His skin in art could remain deep blue, the color of hidden air and unseen depth. Yet artists also gave him a subtle glow, a sense that sunfire lived beneath the surface. This is one of the loveliest visual ideas in Egyptian religion. A god who looks cool and inward from one angle, but who from another seems almost lit from within. If you were standing in a temple workshop while one of those statues was being finished, you might smell plaster dust, heated pigment, cheddar, oil, and sweat. You might see the artist pause with a brush above the eye, wondering how to show both wind and flame in a single divine gaze. It is not an easy task, and yet that difficulty is the point. Amun-Ra is meant to exceed ordinary categories. He is not the hidden one who abandoned concealment, nor the sun god who became less radiant. He is both. That doubleness becomes his claim to supremacy. No ruler understood the usefulness of that better than Hatshepsut. Her reign required theological intelligence of the highest order, because she stood in a position that many would have preferred to reserve for men. To sustain her authority, the court and priesthood needed more than military fact or dynastic accident. They needed a divine framework broad enough to contain apparent contradiction and turn it into inevitability. Amun-Ra offered just that. Hidden wisdom could choose whom it wished. solar authority could then make that choice visible to the world. The god who united concealment and manifestation could certainly choose a woman to bear royal power if he desired it. And so her monuments speak in that language. The obelisks she raised at Karnak are among the most beautiful stone arguments ever made. Tall, deliberate, catching and reflecting sunlight while rooted in temple ground sanctified by older mystery. If you stand with them in imagination, the polished surfaces almost seem to hum with the confidence of someone who has turned theology into architecture. Inscriptions declare that Amun-Ra chose her, favored her, established her. The hidden god knew her worth before others did. The solar god made that worth impossible to ignore. That is how Amun-Ra works in royal ideology. He does not simply grant power. He reveals hidden legitimacy. The more this theology develops, the more other gods must find their places within it. Ra's old solar authority is not erased, but it is absorbed upward into a larger framework. Ptah still crafts. Thoth still knows. Mut still reigns in her fierce maternal dignity. Khonsu still cools the night and heals the troubled. But above them all stands the fused figure who can claim not merely one sphere, but the total relation between hidden cause and visible effect. This is why Amun-Ra becomes king of the gods in a fuller sense than earlier Amun had been. He now touches every level of divine life. Secret planning, cosmic manifestation, royal legitimacy, daily sunrise, temple economy, imperial ideology. And because Egypt was now an empire, the god had to travel beyond Egypt too. That is another reason the fusion proved so successful. In foreign lands, solar worship was easy to recognize. Many peoples honored the sun in one form or another. Ra gave Egypt's supreme god a visible face outsiders could understand. But Amun's hidden aspect gave the same god unusual flexibility. He could work through local traditions without immediately demanding their destruction. He could be felt behind other forms, adapted into provincial worship, interpreted through political success, military surprise, or whispered divine favor. In that sense, Amun-Ra became an imperial deity perfectly suited to a world of layered loyalties. The military language around him becomes especially telling during the great campaigns of the New Kingdom. Kings march under his blessing. Victory is attributed not only to force, but to hidden divine intelligence. This pattern fits the fused god beautifully. Amun provides the unseen strategy, the concealed knowledge of enemy weakness, the breath behind planning. Ra provides the visible sign of triumph, the blazing public confirmation that heaven favors Egyptian rule. The empire can then imagine its success as both wisely prepared and openly justified. I have always thought there is something almost chilling in that combination. A hidden god alone may feel mysterious. A sun god alone may feel majestic. But a hidden sun god, one who plans in silence and then reveals his will in daylight, is a far more formidable thing. He can surprise and then sanctify. He can conceal his movement and then illuminate the result as though it had always been inevitable. This makes Amun-Ra particularly suited to kingship. A pharaoh must often appear in full radiance before the people, while conducting much of his actual rule through quieter processes. Planning, selecting advisors, managing information, weighing risks no public festival will ever display. the fused deity becomes the divine mirror of that reality. The king may be seen as solar in ceremony, but Amunic in judgment, visible in procession, hidden in council, glorious to the people, inscrutable to rivals. Religious thought and political practice slide beautifully into one another here. Stand again at Karnak, but this time later in the morning. The courtyards are brighter now. Gold catches on relief carvings. The smell of incense has mixed with warm stone and the faint sweetness of fresh offerings. Priests chant names that lengthen the god by praise. Amun-Ra, Amun-Ra, each title adding another ring to the growing authority of the supreme deity. A sacred bark waits in shadow. Nearby, officials move with careful seriousness because temple and state are never far apart now. Everything feels more centralized, more assured. The hidden one has not disappeared into daylight. He has taken the daylight into himself. And that means something extraordinary has happened in Egyptian religion. Amun is no longer simply the mysterious force from primordial breath, nor merely the partner of Mut and father of Khonsu. He has become the divine model by which the entire kingdom can understand supreme power. The hidden and the seen have entered one body. The old local god of Thebes now wears the sun without losing the wind. There is also a more intimate side to the fusion that is easy to miss if one thinks only in terms of empire. Amun-Ra gave ordinary worshippers a god who could feel both near and immeasurable. They could stand in full daylight and feel the sun on their shoulders, knowing one face of the deity was openly there. They could also step into the dim inner halls of a temple, smell cool stone and incense, and feel that another face of the same god remained just beyond clear vision. That movement from blazing court to hidden sanctuary made devotion feel complete. One could adore the visible and fear the invisible without changing gods. And perhaps that is the real reason the fusion endured so powerfully. It did not ask Egypt to choose between mystery and certainty. It gave them both in a single divine body. In the next movement of the story, that fusion will descend more directly into human rule itself. Because once Amun-Ra stands as supreme deity, kings can no longer claim authority in ordinary terms. They must be chosen, shaped, and revealed by him. And the throne of Egypt will increasingly depend on the idea that the god of hidden wisdom and visible radiance has personally selected who may sit upon it. Once, Amun had joined with Ra and risen into supreme radiance. The next question was almost unavoidable. If such a god truly ruled above all others, how would his will touch the throne of Egypt? How would a mortal king claim more than inheritance, more than military luck, more than the simple fact of having survived court intrigue long enough to wear a crown? The answer the priesthood gave was daring and very effective. The pharaoh did not merely rule under Amun-Ra. He was chosen by him. That idea changed everything. Earlier kings had long claimed divine favor in one form or another. Egypt had never been shy about placing heaven close to royalty. But the theology surrounding Amun-Ra sharpened the relationship into something far more intimate. The hidden god who saw what others could not, and the visible sun who revealed what must be seen together, created a perfect divine patron for kingship. A ruler could now be presented as someone examined in secret, approved beyond human sight, then made manifest before the nation with unmistakable signs. The king was not just fortunate, he was selected. I have always found that concept both beautiful and unnerving. It wraps power in mystery. It lets rule appear inevitable, because the decisive judgment happened somewhere no ordinary person could challenge. Inside dream, omen, sanctuary, eclipse, or divine whisper. By the time the visible signs appear, argument is already late. The stories surrounding this doctrine are rich with atmosphere. A prince in a remote campaign, perhaps still unknown to history, pauses at a shrine as a solar eclipse darkens the day. Troops look upward in unease. Horses grow restless. The ordinary brightness of the world begins to drain away. In that tense half-light, a voice speaks. Not to everyone, but only to the one who is being called. Amun-Ra has watched. Amun-Ra has weighed. Amun-Ra has chosen. The future king stands still, while those around him hear only silence. Whether every such narrative was believed exactly as written is another question. Some scholars would say these accounts are ceremonial theology, carefully crafted after the fact to justify power. Others would emphasize genuine devotional conviction. Both readings can live in the same room. The point for the sleeping story is not to strip away all sacred language until only politics remains. It is to notice how seamlessly politics and sacred language were woven together. In Egypt, legitimacy was strongest when it could feel hidden before it became public. And so the divine adoption stories flourished. The future pharaoh was said to undergo a transformation in secret. He might sleep in ritual seclusion, pass through ceremonies ordinary eyes could not witness, or have his spirit carried into the divine realm, where Amun-Ra instructed him in the hidden arts of rule. There he would learn to perceive what common men missed. The slight turn of events before crisis. The quiet betrayal before open revolt. The hidden current beneath the public smile. These are exactly the gifts one would expect from a God who joined invisible wisdom with visible authority. Picture such a night. A chamber deep inside Karnak. Thick stone walls, holding coolness even in a hot season. Oil lamps burning low and steady. The smell of linen, resin, and old carved cedar. Priests moving with slow, exact steps. Faces composed. Voices scarcely above breath. The candidate for kingship seated alone for a moment before the rites begin. Not yet transformed. At least not openly. He hears distant temple sounds fading into stillness. He feels the roughness of stone beneath his sandals, the closeness of centuries around him, and perhaps, if he is the sort of man the priests wish him to be, he begins to suspect that the room is larger than its walls. Then the rituals, purification, invocation, hidden names spoken, breath held, breath released. And somewhere in that slow ceremonial darkness, Amun-Ra's claim is laid upon him. The God who cannot be trapped in one form gives the candidate a fragment of divine authority, enough to make his kingship more than administrative, enough to make it cosmic. This is why royal birth narratives become so important in the New Kingdom. Not every king could rely comfortably on smooth succession. Dynasties bent. Courts shifted. Rivals breathed. It helped enormously if a ruler could say not only that he had inherited the throne, but that Amun-Ra had entered history through his very conception. In those stories, the deity approaches the chosen queen in forms that combine mystery and radiance. A breeze at first, a glow, a dream, then a fuller manifestation, golden and blue, hidden and visible at once. The queen becomes not merely mother of a prince, but vessel of divine intention. Again, this is exquisitely suited to Amun-Ra. No other major Egyptian god combines secrecy and revelation so well. A hidden conception can later be made visible through signs, inscriptions, and priestly confirmation. The political brilliance of that should not obscure its poetic power. There is something ancient and moving in the image of a queen sitting awake in the deep hours, while a soft wind stirs the curtains and a shaft of light falls where no light should fall, and realizing that the future of the kingdom has entered the room. No ruler made more dramatic use of this framework than Hatshepsut. Her position demanded it. To secure herself fully as pharaoh, she needed more than precedent. She needed transcendence of precedent. Amun-Ra offered exactly that. If the supreme deity existed beyond ordinary categories, if his hidden wisdom saw worth where human custom hesitated, then his choice of a woman for kingship could be presented not as an anomaly, but as a revelation of deeper order. Reliefs and inscriptions do this work with immense confidence. The god comes to her mother. The god fathers the royal child. The god later confirms her rule. Public coronation then becomes the visible flowering of what hidden selection already settled. Ceremonies unfold before gathered witnesses. Sacred barks move. Incense rises. Priests declare. Signs are interpreted. The people see what the god has chosen to reveal. This is the Ra side of the equation. Hidden worth must eventually step into the sun. Imagine the coronation court. Columns blazing with painted color. Gold flashing at wrist and collar. White linen so bright it almost seems to make its own light. The sacred bark resting on the shoulders of priests. Its cabin veiled, mysterious, full of divine presence. Courtiers holding their breath without meaning to. Outside, the city alive with rumor and heat. Inside, the crucial instant approaching. The candidate stands ready. Questions of gender, birth order, faction, or force all wait just beyond the edge of sacred space. But the bark moves, or seems to move. The priests cry out that Amun-Ra has chosen, and suddenly theology closes around power like a perfectly fitted garment. This is how divine kingship works at its most refined. The god does not merely bless an accomplished fact. He creates the grammar through which the fact becomes acceptable. From the throne room, the idea spreads outward. Provincial governors obey not only because the king commands troops, but because resistance becomes resistance to divine selection. Soldiers fight not only for land or pay, but for a ruler carrying the hidden spark of Amun-Ra. Foreign diplomats negotiate not just with a court, but with the earthly representative of the supreme god. Legal judgments, building projects, temple endowments, taxation, military campaigns, all of them gather extra force when attached to divine legitimacy. The hidden and visible nature of Amun-Ra proves useful yet again. His favor can be claimed in private deliberation and displayed in public ceremony. One can see why the priesthood became so powerful. At Karnak, especially, the high priest of Amun-Ra stood near the center of the entire system. He interpreted divine will, supervised rituals, advised on legitimacy, and oversaw vast resources flowing through the temple economy. Religious and political power intertwined so tightly that separating them would have seemed artificial. The temple was not only a sacred place, it was an engine. Wealth, labor, architecture, festival, administration, all of it turning around. The idea that the supreme god's hidden wisdom and solar authority continued to guide Egypt through visible institutions. And then there was Siwa, far from the great temple complexes of the Nile, deep in the Libyan desert. The oracle of Amun became one of the most remarkable extensions of this divine authority. I have always loved the atmosphere of Siwa. Distance itself becomes part of the holiness. To reach the oasis, one crosses long stretches of silence. Sand, wind, heat shimmering over stone, until suddenly green appears like mercy. Springs, date palms, shade, a sanctuary in the emptiness. It feels exactly like the kind of place where a hidden god would enjoy speaking. Visitors came with questions of war, succession, law, and destiny. Kings came, claimants came, generals came. Each underwent preparation, fasting, washing, waiting. That waiting matters. Oracles are more powerful when they make you slow down enough to become uncertain about your own motives. By the time a petitioner entered the inner chamber, they had already crossed heat, distance, ritual, and the strange anxiety of hoping a god might answer clearly. Picture the oracle room. Rock-cut walls, narrow shafts of light entering at steep angles, incense thick enough to soften edges, gold and lapis catching small points of brightness, priests chanting in low sequences, the sound folding into the chamber's acoustics until one cannot always tell whether the voice is near or strangely far away. The statue of Amun present before the supplicant, still and yet never fully still, if fear is working on the mind. The question is written, or spoken, or both. Then the response comes, by movement, by voice, by interpretation, by ritual sign, according to the tradition being observed. For military matters, the oracle was said to be especially valued. Hidden wisdom and visible authority, again. Amun-Ra could reveal what scouts missed, what allies concealed, where danger waited beneath apparent advantage. A king seeking war could leave with strategy sanctified. A claimant in a succession dispute could be raised or humbled by the god's judgment. A priestly appointment might be confirmed not merely by factional influence, but by divine indication. The bark inclines, the statue turns. The priests pronounce, a life changes. Some of this, no doubt, depended on human management, political skill, and institutional choreography. Ancient religion and modern skepticism often stare at one another too hard and miss the more interesting truth. That ritual can be both sincerely sacred and strategically administered at the same time. Siwa mattered because people believed it mattered, and because that belief was sustained by impressive ceremony, long tradition, and enough persuasive outcomes to keep the reputation alive. By now, Amun-Ra's kingship has become more than an idea centered in one city. It is a network of sacred endorsement, stretching from Karnak's shadowed halls to desert sanctuaries, from royal birth chambers to coronation courts, from battlefield plans to diplomatic letters. The hidden god who once moved over none without being fully noticed now sits behind the selection of kings and the speech of oracles. There is something almost inevitable about that when you look back over the whole arc. Hiddenness becomes strategy. Strategy becomes authority. Authority becomes revelation. Revelation becomes empire. And still the story is not done growing darker or deeper. Because once Amun-Ra governs kingship, he must also defend the cosmos itself. A ruler over Egypt is not enough for a god of this scale. In the next movement of the tale, he descends each night into the underworld to face the great serpent of chaos, proving that the same deity who chooses kings must also keep the sun itself from being swallowed by the dark. By the time Amun-Ra stands at the summit of Egyptian religion, crowned in sunlight and hidden wisdom at once, one more duty waits for him beyond kings, temples, and oracles. It is not enough to bless coronations or guide armies. A god who claims supreme authority must also protect the order of the universe itself. In Egyptian thought, that order was never secure simply because it had once been established. It had to be maintained, defended, renewed, and in the deepest hours of every night, fought for. That is where the story turns downward. Each evening, the visible sun approaches the western horizon, and to ordinary human eyes, this might seem like a gentle ending. The heat softens. The colors over the Nile become bronze and rose. Birds cross toward their resting places. Temple shadows lengthen. Children are called indoors. The day gathers itself and folds away. But beneath that peaceful surface, the old Egyptian imagination heard another truth. The sun was not merely disappearing. It was beginning a dangerous journey through the underworld. And the one who rode that hidden path, whether named Ra or Amun-Ra in later theology, had to confront chaos itself before dawn could return. The enemy waiting in that darkness was Apophis, the great serpent of disorder, called Apep in Egyptian tradition, a being not simply hostile, but fundamentally opposed to form, rhythm, law, and continuation. If Amun-Ra represented the joined perfection of hidden plan and visible order, Apophis represented the opposite, the drag back toward unmaking, a long body of ruin, a mouth of interruption, a force that wished the sun would not rise again. Picture the western horizon now, not as the end of a day you and I know, but as a threshold. The solar bark descends. Light thins across the fields. Last gold lies on the tops of pylons and vanishes. Priests in temple courts continue the final rites of evening. And somewhere deep in the theological imagination, Amun-Ra shifts. His visible solar authority cannot remain unchanged in the underworld. It must travel differently there. The hidden aspect, the older Amunic depth, grows stronger as the bark enters darkness. The bark itself in these stories is no ordinary vessel. It is divine transport, yes, but also a floating axis of order. Around it gather other gods who must assist in the nightly passage. Thoth with measured intelligence. Isis with protecting magic. Set for all his troubled nature. as a necessary fighter against chaotic force. Each member of the company matters because no single principle can carry the world alone. Wisdom, spellcraft, ferocity, memory, speech, and light all have their place when the path ahead winds through the country of the dead. And what a landscape that is! The underworld is not simply blackness. It is terrain, caverns, rivers, gates, strange expanses of dimness where shape feels unreliable, sand where no earthly sand should be, water that moves without reflecting ordinary sky, rocks twisted into forms that seem almost deliberate in their refusal to comfort the eye. If you were standing there with me, then I am grateful we are only imagining it. You would feel how different the dark can be when it belongs not to sleep, but to trial. The air would seem thicker. Sound would travel strangely. Distance would not feel trustworthy. Every lantern of divine radiance would matter. Apophis waits in that realm with patience vast enough to feel geological. He is not merely a monster appearing for excitement at the correct dramatic hour. He is repetition itself, the recurring threat that never quite disappears. Every night he returns. Every night the struggle must be renewed. His body coils through the underworld like a refusal written in muscle and shadow. Ancient texts make him immense, large enough to block the passage, large enough to swallow the bark itself, large enough to persuade even gods that dawn might fail if vigilance should falter. The first attacks are not always direct. That too feels psychologically wise. Chaos often arrives first as confusion. The serpent sends illusions. Familiar paths seem altered. Known landmarks appear shifted. Voices echo where no speaker stands. The company of the bark hears things that should not be there. Cries, whispers, old names, sounds of distress designed to draw attention away from the true path. This is exactly the kind of warfare suited to Apophis. Before disorder destroys, it disorients. Amun-Ra meets this not only with brilliance, but with discernment. His hidden aspect becomes essential here. The visible solar blaze cannot solve every underworld danger by mere intensity. One also needs inward perception, the ability to know what is real before reacting. The old union of Amun and Ra proves its worth night after night in this terrain. Ra's force pushes forward. Amun's hidden wisdom keeps that force from being wasted on shadows. Then comes direct confrontation. Imagine the bark moving through a narrow underworld channel, its divine light spread in trembling bands across dark water. The crew alert, still, listening. Ahead something shifts. Then again, the river seems to thicken. The surface bulges. A shape longer than any ship, darker than the dark around it, rises by degrees until it is impossible to say where serpent ends and night begins. Apophis opens his mouth, and the whole path seems to tilt toward it. Egyptian texts describe spells, strikes, commands, and acts of binding used against him. The language can be martial, but for our night journey let it remain softer in sound, though not in seriousness. This is a struggle for continuity. Amun-Ra speaks words that reassert order. The supporting gods pull, steer, chant, defend. Set hurls force against the serpent's advance. Isis holds the protective line through magic and name. Thoth measures, guides, remembers the proper route and the proper formula. At the hardest moments, Amun-Ra unleashes full radiance, and the underworld itself seems briefly astonished. The hidden god within him does not vanish when this happens. Rather, concealment and revelation act together. Wind and fire, breath and sun. The serpent recoils, not permanently, never permanently, but enough for passage to continue. Enough for the bark to move forward. Enough for mourning to remain possible. And yet even such a god, with temples rich beyond counting, with priests powerful enough to advise kings, with cosmic battles validating his supreme role every single night, was not beyond challenge. In fact, the very success of Amun-Ra's religious system created the conditions for one of the strangest upheavals in Egyptian history. The challenge did not come first from a foreign army or a rival monster. It came from a king, Amenhotep IV, who would become Akhenaten, was born into a world saturated with Amun's greatness. Karnak stood magnificent. The priesthood of Amun was wealthy, educated, influential, deeply woven into state life. The old rituals were regular as the Nile's logic. The hidden and visible power of Amun-Ra seemed secure. But there are moments in history when too much complexity begins to trouble certain minds, and Akhenaten appears to have been one of those minds. He looked at Egypt's layered theology and found it crowded. Not false, perhaps at first, only excessive. Too many gods, too many names, too many old stories folded into one another, too many hidden chambers in which authority could gather beyond a king's direct reach. He turned instead toward Aten, the solar disk, the visible source of light itself, immediate, clear, undeniable. No hiddenness required. No dim sanctuary needed. No mystery beyond the sky's brilliant fact. The reforms began gradually, which is how the most serious changes often begin. More emphasis on the solar disk. More language praising direct light. Slightly less prominence for older cults. Then stronger actions. Funding moved. Temples favored or neglected. Inscriptions changed. Old names began to disappear from stone. Amun, who had risen by concealment and fusion, now faced a ruler determined to strip religion down to one visible source. Then came the rupture. Akhenaten changed his name. He founded a new capital, Akhetaten, built open to the sun, a city of courtyards rather than hidden chambers, of exposure rather than layered, sacred interior. Traditional temple architecture had cultivated mystery through shadow, threshold, and veiled sanctum. The new temples of Aten rejected that mood. They welcomed direct sunlight. The divine did not dwell hidden in darkness there. It shone openly from above. For the priesthood of Amun, this was not merely offensive. It was existential. Imagine the old sanctuaries at Karnak. Inner rooms cool and dim. Incense lingering in the air. Gold surfaces flashing only where lamplight catches them. Priests moving with inherited precision through rites perfected across generations. Then imagine chisel against stone. Amun's name cut away. Donations reduced. Workshops displaced. Craftsmen uncertain. Temple singers silenced or reassigned. It must have felt like waking to find that the grammar of the world had been declared obsolete overnight. The old order had deep roots in economy, daily life, local devotion, and political legitimacy. Amun-Ra was not merely a theological abstraction. He was built into how the kingdom breathed. Remove that hidden support too quickly, and the visible structure begins to tremble. Which is exactly what happened. Resources shifted awkwardly. Administrative life grew strained. Foreign affairs suffered. Traditional loyalties weakened. The new city shone in the desert, but brightness alone could not solve every earthly problem. And after Akhenaten's death, the reforming flame cooled with surprising speed. Aten had ruled in the open sun, but Amun had remained in the long memory of institutions, craftsmen, priests, provincial traditions, and all the quiet places where a hidden god is hardest to uproot. Restoration followed. Under Tutankhamun and those who guided his reign, the old names returned. Amun's temples revived. Ceremonies of reconciliation were performed. The kingdom explained its troubles as the consequence of having turned away from the proper divine order. That is one of the reasons the restoration feels so emotionally powerful in Egyptian history. It is not only political correction, it is return. A coming back into shade after too much relentless brightness. A rediscovery of hidden depth after a period of dangerous simplification. By the end of this part of the story, Amun has survived chaos in two forms. Cosmic chaos, embodied by the serpent in the underworld. Historical chaos, embodied by a king who tried to replace sacred hiddenness with pure, visible simplicity. In both struggles, the same truth emerges. Order cannot live by brilliance alone. It needs depth, memory, and what remains active even when unseen. In the final movement of our night, Amun's story will grow stranger and more inward again. We will follow his many forms: ram, goose, king, hidden source, and then move into the mystery, traditions, and the long afterlife of his ideas, where the temples fade, but the hidden God remains, still breathing behind history itself. After the great serpent of chaos, after the challenge of Akhenaten, after restoration and renewed incense beneath the vaults of Karnak, Amun's story does not simply end in triumph. It deepens. In some ways, it becomes stranger, more intimate, and more difficult to pin down, which is exactly as it should for a god whose essence was hiddenness from the beginning. The later tradition gathers around his many forms. Sometimes he appears as a ram, those curved horns carrying force, fertility, and guarded strength. Sometimes as a goose linked to creation and the first egg, a quieter but no less meaningful form. Sometimes as a handsome young man with blue skin and calm eyes. Sometimes as a divine pharaoh crowned in perfect symbolism. Sometimes merged with other gods, borrowing or absorbing aspects without ever losing himself. This flexibility is not decorative. It is theological proof. Amun can take forms because he is not confined by any one of them. Picture one of those avenues in early morning. Dust still cool where night has not fully withdrawn. great ram-headed guardians stretching into the distance, the first sun touching only their upper surfaces, while their lower stone remains in shadow. Priests walking between them with offerings. The smell of fresh bread, oil, and damp lotus stems carried from riverbanks. The hush of a place so accustomed to grandeur that it no longer needs to advertise it. Amun in ram form feels like that. Quiet grandeur. Weight held in reserve. The goose form is subtler. Less imposing, perhaps, but full of old theological memory. Ancient Egyptians connected geese to creation, especially to the laying of the cosmic egg. Amun's relation to this image returns us to the earliest part of the story, to the waters before form, to the hidden breath around the shell of becoming. In later sacred thought, to imagine Amun as Goose was, to remember that his power existed before kingship, before empire, before his own supreme title had hardened into doctrine. It connected the temple giant back to the primordial mystery. If the ram reminds worshippers of strength, the goose reminds them of origin. Then there is Amun in human form, perhaps the most approachable and the most elusive at once. As a man, he can wear crowns, hold scepters, stand in relation to queens, priests, and kings. Yet even here the old hiddenness remains. His face is serene, but never wholly readable. His blue skin retains the depth of air and sky. His plumes rise above him like visible traces of invisible force. He is beautiful in the controlled way Egyptian gods often are, balanced, composed, less interested in emotional display than in symbolic certainty. And still, if you look long enough, or imagine looking long enough, there is always the feeling that this is only one angle on him, not the whole truth. That sensation fed the mystery traditions. Within the priesthood, and especially in the higher, more guarded levels of instruction, Amun came to mean more than a supreme state god. He became a doorway into questions that ordinary public worship could only hint at. What is hidden reality? How does visible life emerge from concealed source? Why do different creation stories all seem partly true? How can one God have many forms without becoming many different beings? These are not the sorts of questions a weary farmer asks while checking irrigation channels at dusk. Though of course farmers can be more philosophical than priests sometimes assume. Still, temple schools made such questions their serious labor. Students learned ritual first. That makes sense. Every mystery needs groundwork. Reading and writing sacred signs, measuring calendars, understanding offerings, tracking stars, memorizing hymns, observing purity rules. Then, for those judged worthy, deeper teachings opened. Hieroglyphs were not merely read but unfolded. Symbols linked across texts. Seemingly separate myths shown as different faces of one hidden structure. Amun, in the highest understanding, was not merely one god among others, but the concealed source through which the others might also be understood. This is one of the most sophisticated aspects of his legacy. He becomes a way of thinking. The secret teachings around him suggested that the multiplicity of Egyptian religion, all those gods, animal forms, local cults, solar hymns, underworld journeys, royal myths, might not be contradiction, at all. They might be the visible fragments of a reality too large to be shown at once. Amun's hiddenness then becomes less like absence and more like fullness. The unseen is not empty. It is too complete to be held by one image. I have always thought that is why his theology survived so much change. It could stretch. It had room in it. And Egypt would need that room, because history does not preserve any one sacred order forever. Greeks arrived, then Romans, then Christians, then Islam. Dynasties ended, languages shifted, priests vanished, temples cracked and filled slowly with wind-blown sand. Yet Amun's underlying ideas moved on in strange and subtle ways. Under the Ptolemies, Egyptian and Greek traditions intertwined in creative and sometimes bewildering ways. New composite gods appeared. Old temples took on new architectural details. Philosophers and priests translated one another imperfectly and fruitfully. In such a world, Amun remained adaptable. A hidden god can survive cultural mixture more easily than a rigid one. He can be interpreted, merged, recognized under foreign names, and still retain something essential, because what is essential was never wholly visible in the first place. The Romans, practical as ever in religion when it suited stability, also found ways to leave older sacred currents in place. Amun's temples continued in altered forms. His symbols endured. His priests thought and wrote still, even as empire changed the frame around them. And so the hidden god fades from public cult while remaining strangely alive as a pattern. That may be his greatest victory. Not the wealth of Karnak, though that was immense. Not the political power of his priesthood, though that was formidable. Not even his status as king of the gods, dazzling as that became. His deepest triumph is that the central intuition he carried, that the most powerful reality may be the one least easy to display, remains spiritually persuasive long after his statues have gone quiet. If you walk now through the ruins where he was once adored, perhaps at Luxor, perhaps at Karnak, perhaps only in imagination, if your evening budget does not currently allow for international archaeology, you will notice how much survives in fragments. Fallen blocks, colossal columns open to sky, reliefs worn by time and sand, ram-headed sphinxes with features softened by centuries, birds nesting where incense once rose, tourists passing with water bottles and bright shoes, as all civilizations deserve in the end. A second life of mild inconvenience under the gaze of people trying to remember dates. And yet the atmosphere remains powerful. The stone still teaches scale. The avenues still teach intention. The sanctuaries, even ruined, still teach the difference between open court and hidden chamber. Stand long enough, and you begin to understand that Amun's religion was never only about what was shown. It was about movement inward, procession from sunlight to shadow, from public monument to secret room, from visible grandeur to hidden presence. The architecture itself was theology in stone. This is why the final meaning of Amun matters so much. He is not simply a god who happened to become important in one phase of Egyptian politics. He is a meditation on the nature of ultimate reality, hidden, yet sustaining all things, beyond full comprehension. yet intimately present in breath. Change, kingship, healing, return, and sacred silence. The ancient Egyptians, through long centuries of reflection, built around him a theology at once practical and profound. Farmers could ask for protection. Kings could claim endorsement. Priests could pursue metaphysical subtlety. Empire could build with his name. Mystics could disappear into hidden doctrine. A single divine idea held all of that because hiddenness is capacious. There is a comfort in ending here rather than with one last dramatic conquest. Amun does not finally win by destroying every rival. He wins by outlasting forms, by surviving as an intuition deeper than any one political arrangement, by teaching that what matters most may not be the thing staring most brightly at us from the surface of the world. Sometimes the deepest truths are the ones that move like wind through a room, felt before fully named, necessary before fully understood. You know that feeling when the fire in a room has burned lower, and the shadows on the wall grow softer, and for a little while everything important seems quieter than it did before. That is where Amun belongs at the end of his story. Not gone, quiet, concealed again, as he was at the beginning. The primordial waters have long since given way to kingdoms, then ruins, then scholarship, then silence. Mut's wings no longer shine in festival processions. Khonsu's silver disk no longer receives offerings from royal hands. Amun-Ra's priests no longer speak in Karnak's innermost rooms. Yet the Hidden One remains strangely recognizable in the human search for what cannot be reduced to plain surfaces. Perhaps that is why his story is still worth telling at night. Not because we need to become ancient Egyptians before sleep. Not because one old theology must replace another. But because there is something deeply human in the recognition that visible life rests on invisible supports. Breath, memory, love, intention, time, the unseen logic holding days together, the hidden courage that gets people through sorrow, the quiet wisdom that takes years to notice in someone, the truth that presence is not always loud. Amun began as a god of hidden air over the dark waters. He became the husband of a queenly goddess, the father of moonlit healing, the son in union with hiddenness, the chooser of kings, the speaker of oracles, the defender against chaos, the survivor of revolution, the lord of many forms, the teacher of mystery, and then, at last, something even more refined, a symbol of the unseen fullness at the heart of existence. That is a long journey for one god. It is also a strangely peaceful one to contemplate in the dim hours, because it starts in silence and ends there too. The same hiddenness that made him difficult to grasp at the beginning makes him difficult to lose at the end. So let the temples recede now. Let the columns fall back into moonlit memory. Let the desert wind move through broken stone. Let the Hidden One return to the place he always occupied best, just behind the visible world, close enough to stir the air, far enough to remain mysterious. And if the room around you feels a little quieter now, a little deeper, a little more gently shadowed, perhaps that is fitting. Amun was never the god of harsh endings. He was the god of concealed continuance, of presence that does not demand spectacle, of truths that stay alive by moving inward. The fire is lower now, The night has done its work. The old god can rest where he began, in the hidden places beyond full description, while you do something simpler and kinder. Close your eyes. Let the breath come easily. Let the visible world grow soft. And follow the hidden one, not into fear, but into stillness. Good night.